So what the book's about is challenging the consensus which existed in Britain for a long time, that we're all middle class now. The old working class had ceased to exist. Either it had been so-called aspirational and joined the middle class, or else all that remained was this work-shy, problematic rump living on these broken council estates and communities in Britain. So for me, what I wanted to challenge is the idea that class was no longer an issue in Britain. And what's interesting is, if the book had come out 5 years before, I don't think it would have made half the impact. And that's because of a few things. Firstly, the huge economic crisis which has hit Britain and other countries. And it's almost impossible at a time of recession to deny the huge and just distribution of wealth and power in a society. Because we were told at the beginning of the crisis that we're all in this together. That's what the government keeps telling us. But that's actually become increasingly offensive as the crisis has worn on. Because whilst it's a very serious crisis for the majority of people in Britain, in fact living standards are declining at their fastest rate since my grandmother was born in the early 1920s, it remains boom time for the people at the top. Each year, the British newspaper, the Sunday Times, looks at the top 1,000 wealthiest people in Britain. Their wealth went up last year by nearly a fifth. The year before that, it went up by 30%. It's the biggest jump ever recorded. So it's impossible in that situation to deny that class isn't an issue anymore. So that is what the book wanted to do. It wanted to show that actually class is the absolutely key way of understanding how British society is organised. Now, in terms of specifically, if you like, what the book was really looking at, this idea of what's called chavs in Britain. I know in Germany you have the term Prolls, but it was this idea that either you were middle class and prosperous and getting on with life, or you were this belonged to the other part of Britain, which was this demonised rump of people who didn't want to get work, or were lazy, were racist, were backward, and hadn't become middle class because, if you like, they hadn't pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. They were the people to blame. Well, if you're a socialist like me, you have to be an optimist, and I am an optimist. The way I see things is that the reason Britain has been left such an unequal place, where so many gains that working people fought for have been taken away, all of that comes down to power. The power of working class people was so attacked from the 1980s onwards. So what has to change now is to redistribute wealth and power from the people at the top to working people as a whole. Now, the trade unions have a key role to play in that. They represent over 6 million workers in Britain. They remain the biggest democratic movement in the country. People, whether they be bin collectors or nurses, teachers, lollipop ladies, classroom assistants and so on, the pillars of any decent society. So they have to fight to organise to represent those people, and that means partly through the Labour Party, and the unions have a link with the Labour Party so they can actually fight for their policies. So they need to get more working class people selected as members of Parliament. At the moment, over 2/3 of MPs in Britain come from professional middle class backgrounds. How will we ever be able to address the issues that affect working people unless we have working class people in Parliament? So what the trade unions have started to do now is to say we're going to get more working class people who support our union agenda, and we're going to get them selected as Labour MPs. So that's very important. I think if we come up with coherent policies like taking over the banks, which are propped up by the taxpayer, but we don't have any democratic control over them, if we create that coherent alternative which gives people confidence that there is an alternative to austerity, because otherwise people feel resigned, then I think actually we can shift the debate in Britain and actually have a trade union movement and a Labour Party which can go and fight for working people once again, and that's of course what they were founded to do in the first place.